On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Kinshuk Mishra. He is the VP of Engineering at Cedar. We're going to be talking about the hyper growth that the company is facing. They need to hire, they need to grow skill sets. And the one particular area we're going to be talking about is the leadership layer. And obviously, everyone needs to move people through the process and build either leaders or hire them from the outside. And we're going to be talking about how Cedar is actually working to do this. We're going to be talking about how underrepresented groups are being pulled into leadership potential roles as well. I'm excited to have you on the podcast, Kinshuk. Thank you.
Hi, Amir. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I always like to start with two things. One is tell us what Cedar does at a high level to understand. And then the second is, as the VP of Engineering, what falls on your plate?
Sure. So Cedar is a digital health startup. Our financial technology platform gives consumers a seamless, modern, and a very transparent billing experience. What my role entails is essentially leading the engineering teams to help build products which enable us to build multiple solutions for providers who are basically the healthcare providers in the medical space, and also consumers who are the patients in the healthcare space, and build interfaces and different experiences for them as it relates to solving billing problems.
Awesome. And you're, I guess, VP of Engineering. What falls on your plate as the VP of Engineering?
So my role fundamentally involves leading multiple product teams, which are focused on different aspects of building products. We have one of the teams focused on building the payment solution, one of the teams focused on building the solutions for providers who are the hospital systems, because they have internal portals which their operators use for managing the billing on behalf of hospital groups. And there are several other product teams focused on several other initiatives. And these were two examples which highlight what the teams do. Now, my role entails not only making sure that our teams can build the software for these products, but also growing the team in a manner where, as the product continues to scale, we are building a very scalable organization, keeping our values, our mission intact, and enable the organization to continue to deliver efficiently.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys are going through some growth, which is a good thing. Brings with it some problems, good problems, not bad problems, but good problems, but challenges obviously that need to be worked through. I guess at the high level, maybe we just talk about what hypergrowth means, because I think when we use the term, to me, it's how long a piece of string is, and every company has a different definition. Like when you're talking about hypergrowth and the company's kind of facing, that stage, what is the context of what hypergrowth means for Cedar?
Sure. To give some context, Cedar was around 50 engineers at the beginning of 2021. By the end of the year, we reached 150 engineers. And by the end of this year, if everything goes well, we'll be almost doubling the size of our engineering team. Now, if you look at the rate of growth, it's clearly very exponential. What it means is it introduces a lot of the challenges in the context of our day-to-day work, in the context of how our processes are built, the manner in which we have to scale our communication. So there are different aspects of how we have to evolve. Now, none of these changes are very incremental. Sometimes it requires a very systematic way of transforming, the fundamental operations of the company. So in a sense, when we say hypergrowth, we mean that there are going to be several changes which we can tweak to make us work very effectively, but often some of the changes are going to be very radical, and we have to be very mindful and aware of bringing about those changes to our daily work.
Absolutely. And I guess as you're kind of going through, the hyper growth, and obviously, 50 engineers, 2021, double that, and then doubling again this year, you must be facing near-term, long-term decision points as well, right? Like you need to be anticipating your growth and hiring for potential issues you're seeing, but also starting to forecast potentially what's coming down the pike in terms of, those challenges. How much focus do you put in terms of that, near-term versus long-term hiring goals?
That's a very, very sort of top of mind issue for all of us within the Cedar engineering leadership team. And obviously, a lot of that, is built on the foundation of our product roadmap. So, I'm very happy to report that, generally speaking, we have a very good long-term view on where we want to be, which essentially lays the foundation for the key skills, the key capabilities that we need to bring onto the engineering team. In some sense, the short-term needs are very imminent and, very tangible. We know what are the skill gaps we might have, what are the seniority gaps we might have. And based on that, we can do an assessment of, certain kinds of skills are required for meeting project deadlines, getting things delivered on time. But we also anticipate, certain key capabilities down the line, maybe in Q3, Q4 of this year, would involve introducing new skill sets and also bringing certain kinds of talent, which might be more senior, which might be more experienced, and probably has, the prior experience of having done it in the past. And often hiring for those roles requires a little bit of foresight, a little bit of lead time, because, right from the time when you start sourcing for the talent, engaging with that talent, getting them through the interview process, onboarding, it often ends up taking, at times multiple weeks, if not at least a quarter. So we tend to have like a view on how to think about that. And often the approach we take is, we try and at a very low level of confidence, figure out what are the projects down the line that would require skill sets and work backwards from there. The two other dimensions that we sort of, keep, ourselves aware of is in terms of the skill mix, things are a bit more obvious, but we are very intentional about the experience versus non-experience mix as it relates to bringing on talent, because one advantage growth companies like us have is we can actually leverage some inexperienced talent, which has very high potential, and train them to do things which will enable them to learn quickly, enable them to grow with the company. But the challenge is that if you do not have enough seniority in the mix, which can provide that guidance, then it becomes a challenge. And I think, I particularly have this theory that we should have like a bell curve of seniority on your teams, right? Like you really need like super senior, few of those individuals in the mix. You need definitely a good mix of senior to mid-senior individuals. And then, you can have like a little bit of tail of very, very junior talent, often new grads or interns who are about to get graduated. And then, with that kind of mix, often things work out really well in terms of partnership. So that's how we approach hiring at Cedar. And often we've had some success with that approach so far.
It's a tricky balance because obviously, as you're doubling the engineering team, having a lot of engineers is awesome, but managing and guiding the work becomes incrementally hard. And your engineering managers can only have, so many reports. How do you, I guess, philosophically look at that? At what point is it like, I need to hire more engineering managers and I need to make sure that, the current managers are, have a balanced work schedule themselves so they can actually address the team goal, the mentorship goals, and the product delivery goals?
Yeah. What we've observed is typically, the level of hands-on management, which is very effective, tends to see some challenges once the ratio is, off by 1:5, right? What I mean by that is like often for one engineering manager, if you have 5 direct reports, the quality of coaching, the quality of mentorship, hands-on guidance as it relates to, both technical coaching, helping individuals with, system design related learning and coaching, especially more relevant for junior talent. And also like enabling people to get things done and be tasked with project management is usually effective until that kind of ceiling. So our general rule of thumb is if managers are starting to get number of directs north of 5 individuals, then we often want to have another manager, come into the mix. Now, what helps us actually manage that a bit more effectively is organically trying to identify the talent which can take on that management responsibility from within for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that often individuals who've been at the organization have a lot of institutional knowledge. They really know how things are getting done. And they often have a lot of technical credibility within the team members to take on some of the management responsibilities. Secondly, it showcases that there are tons of opportunities for individuals to grow into several roles. Leadership can come in different forms, but one of them is definitely through management. And that path is a possibility from within. People don't have to seek these roles outside Cedar. They can continue to satisfy those ambitions and aspirations from within Cedar. And thirdly, these transitions are much easier to navigate without having inefficiencies, right? So whenever we know that a team is about to approach 5 or 6 engineers, we can start identifying talent a bit in advance. And often filling in those roles are much more quick compared to hiring from the outside, because again, the lead time and everything comes into play. And by the time you can hire someone, it will take a few months. So that's one of the strategy that we've been using quite a lot internally, and it's been paying dividends.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, we will add it to the show notes as a link to the Cedar blog talking about the Distinguished Engineering Program, DEP, which kind of encompasses much of what you're talking about. I guess, just to kind of touch on the program itself, and I guess other people who are listening and, they're either a couple steps back or at the same stage, and they're trying to figure out how do I, build a better mentoring infrastructure, better program to help the internal people be identified. I guess the origins of the DEP program, the Distinguished Engineering Program, was that just realizing that the team is going to have to grow and you need to identify that talent sooner? Or is there other drivers of, how the program originated?
Yeah, I mean, the program has existed from before when I joined Cedar, but I think one of the key things which is very crucial because Distinguished Engineering Program effectively is not something very new. It's effectively something which has existed at other bigger companies for a while, and I'll explain what that is. Right, like Distinguished Engineering Program is a very codified framework for engineering leaders in our organization to provide best practices and standards on what to expect out of engineers and enable them to hone their skills, right? Like on multiple fronts. These are, obviously very role specific expectations, but the bottom line or the base expectation is that everyone, needs to continue to grow in the mastery of their specific skill set, the technical skill set, but they also need to be, exemplifying culture and value traits. And one of the key things which Cedar has done really well is we've actually established the company level cultural values, and the engineering team level values, which we definitely want our engineers to be exemplifying. The other thing is leadership and collaboration is also like a base expectation, right? Like independent of your technical skills, people are expected to mentor each other, help others, but also be drivers of key initiatives on the technical front, like running design reviews, being champions of defining new processes for code reviews, and so on. So effectively, like we've created a structure for giving people more guidance on how to grow. And I think like the thoughtfulness and intentionality behind this is very crucial. Now, to answer your very first question, right? Like, when did we introduce it? And I think like, the response to that would be, I think any company which is often undergoing hyper growth, in my experience, I've often seen like the introduction of any program like DEP, which is, some kind of career framework, often ends up happening too late in the cycle, leaving many engineers frustrated because, now you've surpassed the scale where people are aware of what's happening around them or really know what the growth looks like for them in the context of the company. And the second thing is that the product has become so mature that people don't even quite know, what is the role that they'll be playing, which ladders up to some of the product level and company level goals. So I think like in the context of Cedar, in early 2021, when we were getting close to, 100 people size on the engineering team, and our product had clearly sort of found the product market fit as we were continuing to scale the product, the leadership team made a decision that, now we cannot just assume that people know what success means like for them in the context of Cedar's growth. We need to create more structure. And that's when we made the introduction of this program, which, has enabled engineers to find very structured growth within the organization.
And it's interesting because obviously, you hear the frustration of people leaving organizations as a lack of opportunity. And I guess going through hypergrowth, it could be easy to address gaps in management by bringing somebody in from the outside if you haven't identified those people. And I guess when you're kind of, looking at that aspect, you mentioned something interesting as well, because you said they're going to have better internal credibility when people are promoted, because obviously if they have the tribal knowledge, the internal workings of the product, they have a deeper bond versus somebody from the outside coming in, which might have more management experience. But when you're kind of looking at the program and you're kind of looking at, the impact it's made at the engineering management layer of being able to identify young talent and get them the mentorship, can you have some successes that you've seen that you could talk about, or some examples of how the program has been working for you guys?
I think what might be helpful would be to give a little more detail on what the program entails, right? So our DEP program fundamentally is not necessarily trying to gravitate people towards management as the only option for growth, right? It has two paths, which is very common with what you might see out there at other tech companies, where essentially people start as individual contributors up to a certain level. For us, it's level 4. At that point in time, people either get promoted to senior engineer at level 4, or they can choose to transition from senior engineer to an engineering manager role. Now, what we found as part of that program was that people have found different ways to grow within the company. They can grow all the way on the individual contributor path and end up becoming principal engineers, or they can take on the management route and grow as senior managers, director, and so on. We've seen some internal transfers as well, where people, even after becoming, let's say, a senior manager, realize that, hey, we want to go back to being an IC because there are certain aspects of the IC role that we enjoy. So they've transitioned back to being an individual contributor. Now, with that kind of structure, obviously there's a lot of lateral movement, which is possible. There's also like upward movement in both the paths, which is possible. But one thing we realized was that often people have aspirations to become a manager, but sometimes, they still have to get better at some of the technical skills, which are an expectation of becoming an engineering manager. And in one instance, late last year, we realized that there were two individuals who were identified as solid promo candidates, but they still had, few things that they had to get better at in terms of technical competency. And we realized that this could be actually a great opportunity for us to, figure out a way in which we can give them formal manager training, because that's where they want to grow in their next role within the company. And they still have a gap to close. So we introduced actually an associate engineering manager role, which was at their current level, at level 3, which effectively enabled them to continue to grow on the technical competency front while learning managerial skills, by managing a very small team of one individual or so who were much more junior than they were. And with hands-on management training, they could actually run a few initiatives as managers, which were great, but then also catch up on their technical competency gap and get better at technical skills. And, the great news is actually, as we speak right now, both of them are being considered for promotion, this week, which is great news because, through them, we could actually get good, solid engineering managers from within who now we've established to have great technical competency and good 4 to 5 months of management experience. So the confidence in our decision to get them to engineering manager role is actually fairly high.
That's awesome. Definitely an interesting program. Obviously, I know a lot of companies have it. And I think the way you guys are kind of working with it is specific to your hyper growth phase. Obviously, the need to hire and make sure that you have a system, a process that you can bring people in earlier stage and identify people that might leave to find opportunities, might just be missed as you're growing I think is key. How do you kind of I guess you guys are, this great example of the last, two people you mentioned, they're moving into engineering manager roles. I guess, is it affording you the opportunity to find people that have those attributes that otherwise would be missed? Is there, because of the different people looking at this and different eyes on it, are you guys seeing people that typically would fly under the radar?
Yeah, so I think, this definitely helps us get a lot of junior talent into leadership roles much more easily compared to a traditional way of promoting individuals. Often what we would find is at the junior levels, people who come out of, school and who are newer graduates, that sort of talent tends to be a bit more diverse. And, by identifying the skills and also the willingness, right, of someone to take on management responsibility, I think it's been much easier to provide the access to those opportunities from within, which has been a great learning experience for us and has definitely enabled us to, support individuals with those kind of aspirations.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes the people that come from the non-traditional backgrounds, they have other experiences and other attributes that might help them accelerate in other areas. But obviously, the mentorship and the framework for them to grow into those always aren't available or, not within the right context to kind of be identified. So it sounds like you guys have a good process to take advantage of. Again, you mentioned even being able to bring in the long tail, the junior or the entry level, engineers that have a wider choice of people to bring in and give them opportunities and help them actually kind of progress down the career and stay within the company.
Exactly. And, as you pointed out, right, some of the advantages of that is the institutional knowledge and the exemplification of the values that we've established is just amazing, right? Because then they end up becoming great role models for newer employees who are joining the organization. And, it almost has a nice effect of amplification of some of those values. One of the other things which was a great lesson, for us as a growth stage company was very early, we had some intentionality around establishing what values we want to model within our company, and having these values at the company level and specifically some additional values at the engineering level has enabled us to actually keep the culture very intact through this hypergrowth. Otherwise, often the culture can dilute itself because you really don't have a North Star to look at, right? So some of the identification of values has been a great win in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely spot on. And I think I was reading an article that talked about how the relationship and loyalty between employer and employees has changed, being fully remote. And I think, previously, obviously, everyone went to the office and there were some different bonds that kept people. I'd imagine something like this where, you're bringing people in early stage, helping them build their career, that's going to build loyalty to stay at the company. And I think a lot of, this concern with the great resignation, we've kind of gone through this whole thing where a lot of people moved around. But I think what's lost in the shuffle is that companies are going to need to start identifying ways to keep that engagement, keep that loyalty, keep that culture. And by giving back indirectly, and this is to me like the DEP program, the way you guys have structured it, probably goes a long way to that.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. In many ways, it enables us to sort of set very explicit expectations. And then, it's a great reinforcement of positive validation when people live up to those expectations and in many cases exceed those expectations. They can see these wins in a very sort of tangible manner. And in the long run, right, like a lot of the people who join Cedar at this stage are very mission oriented. So for them to see some tangible wins, helping the broader mission is a great win for everyone, right? Both for the organization and for the employees themselves. So 100% agree with you on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, as you've seen the program kind of, grow and take hold and you've seen it evolve, where do you think it goes? I mean, obviously, hopefully it doesn't go away. It sounds like it's going to stay put, but are you seeing it evolve as the company's kind of, doubling? I mean, is the use cases changing? Are you seeing any evolution in how the program is actually working?
Absolutely. This program is definitely something that we are constantly trying to update based on the identification of like newer challenges we encounter, right? So to give you a very specific example, like over the past year, we've actually built up a pretty good bench of staff level engineers, and often a very standard question that staff engineers ask is like, okay, what's expected of me? Because there are different roles that you can play at that level, right? Like there are multiple archetypes. You can be an architect. You can be like a subject matter expert with a very deep domain knowledge. You can be like the quick problem solver who can jump from problem to problem and help the company sort of resolve issues. And there's no one size fits all, right? Like there are different archetypes. All of them are valuable and have very unique skill sets. And we've not necessarily had the level of specificity in defining those archetypes for like very senior roles, especially staff level roles and principal level roles. And that was intentional because we realized that, that's not a problem we have. But now that we are like more than a year into DEP, we definitely have that problem. That's definitely an area where we want to, provide more clarity. So it's work in progress. And I'm sure as the company continues to grow, we'll definitely identify gaps. This is not an exhaustive set of expectations or exhaustive set of specifications that we've provided. Some of that is intentional, to give enough room for growth. But in the areas when we think like providing more specific input is helpful, we go ahead and make those changes and try and do that at a quarterly cadence. And at minimum, we want to make sure that as we start running more standard performance review cycles going forward at a set cadence, we do regular updates aligned with those performance review cycles so that people, right after that, when their expectations are being set by their managers, they know what to expect out of their roles.
Absolutely. No, I love it. It sounds like a tremendous asset to the company. And I love the examples you provided. It's working and, sounds like it should be working as the company keeps growing. I was going to say, I'm cognizant of time. If somebody wants to reach out to you to kind of, talk a little bit more about the program or anything you mentioned on the podcast, what's a good way of getting a hold of you? Is LinkedIn ideal or do you have another preferred avenue?
Yeah. I mean, if people want to connect with me, they can reach out to me at my email address, which is kinshuk@cedar.com. Feel free to sort of reach out over LinkedIn as well. But often I'll be very responsive if you email directly to me, and then we can find some time to chat.
Awesome. We'll make sure everyone has that link and email so they can reach out to you if they have any questions. Again, thanks for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Amir. Have a good one.
That's it for this episode of the podcast. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. And again, I was after two things at the end of the show. One is if you found the podcast useful, share it. That's how we've been growing. And I appreciate everyone who does share it. And if you do want me to talk about a specific topic, please let me know on LinkedIn or email, however way you like to get a hold of me, and let me know. And I'll try to do my best to find a guest to speak to that topic. Until next time, goodbye.